Welcome to Casual Watch Talk, the podcast from the Casual Watch Reviewer YouTube channel. Join us as we talk everything watches, from watch collecting, the latest horology news and interviews. If you're not already subscribed, subscribe on your favourite podcast app. Let's dive into the show. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 33 of Casual Watch Talk. Today's episode is going to be something of a Seiko special because Chris and I are joined by Todd, who is a member of our Facebook group, but also was one of the original podcast guests that I had on when I was flying solo before Chris, the BK before Chris.
Nice.
So, Todd, I'd love it if you could just introduce yourself very quickly for anyone that wasn't familiar with that first podcast.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sam. It's a pleasure to join you and Chris. But I've been collecting watches just only for a few years, 3 or 4 years. But I'm an engineer, and therefore that means when I get into something technical, I can't help myself. So I've been digging into this, and I especially like chronographs, and so I've been collecting that primarily for this length of time, and I specialize, I guess, or what interests me most are Seiko chronographs from the late 60s and early 70s primarily.
Cool. And we've foregone the wristwatch check because everyone knows the 6 watches that Sam and I own, but I think it looks like you got the Hamilton on there, Todd.
Good eyes. Yes, I have. I bought this new when Hamilton reissued the Pan Europe line of chronographs back in 2014. No, it was before that, but I bought this in 2015. And so I've had this for about, I guess, it's almost 5 years now or so. And this thing still keeps almost cost-like time. It's amazing. The Hamilton does a great job with the 7750s. They kind of go and tweak them and make them a little bit better. And this thing, plus or minus a couple seconds a day.
Yeah, love the old racing chronographs, and certainly the new vintage racing chronographs. Very cool. So my watch obsession this week is I 3D printed a tourbillon movement, tourbillon escapement. And at first, I was like, I was reading the comments of this particular one, and I put a link up to it in our Facebook group. And I was reading the comments of this particular one, and everybody was like, oh, it doesn't print right, and like the size is wrong, and I had to like polish it, and all these like frustrating things. But one of the things that, that I've been talking about with 3D printing is it's come a long way. And so I have a, brand new 2020 3D printer that is precision, parts accurate as far as size accuracy is very high. So I was able to print it out as a test and got it working pretty easily. So now I've upped my game a little bit. I've got one that, I'll post pics, but I've got one that I printed out. I've got this like silver, bronze, gold metallic filament that I picked up. And so printed one out in the base in silver and the balance wheel in gold and the, different parts. It's cool. It looks great. And just ticking away. So having some fun with that. It's a great sort of primer for understanding how they work, but also I don't think I would be able to have assembled it correctly the first time had I not taken one apart, like had taken a watch apart. so like a little bit of watchmaker skill necessary there to get it going and to understand like, oh, the pallet fork is hitting. But a bit of a watch obsession. So getting a 3D printed tourbillon worth, what's the cheapest one you can get? Probably like
about 10 grand, right? Doesn't Tag make a 10 grand tourbillon? Not counting Chinese stuff. There's one out of China too.
Yeah, and I think I was looking at the Frédéric Constant does one that's like $20,000 of their line, and I was like, all right, for a thousandth of the price. So
is this the scale? Is this the right size? Or
no, this is it's huge. It's large.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was wondering.
Yeah, no.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's millimeter accuracy, tenths of a millimeter accuracy, not thousandths of a millimeter accuracy. So it's good.
That's really cool. Todd, have you had a watch obsession this week?
My watch obsession has been watch auctions, Sam, and and what what sort of shenanigans go on as I've researched them more and more, as I've gone down the rabbit hole of what I thought auctions were, and then what they really are is a lot different than I expected. Now, I bought a couple of my vintage Seikos I bought off auctions before. I bought off Invaluable before, but none of these auctions make any claims necessarily. And you've got to be, you've got to know what you're doing, just like you do on eBay, right? eBay is the great, unknown wild west of all sorts of things. And so I bought recently, and the Seiko folks out there will know, a Tokizara, which is a 6138 chronograph off of Invaluable, and at very little money. It was great. Actually, I couldn't believe I won it. But looking at the one that's been in the news lately off a very large auction house, Bonhams, has been very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think this is going to make for a great main topic, actually. We're going to be doing a bit of a Seiko special, so we'll be asking Todd a lot about vintage Seiko watches, but also there's been a lot of news recently about this Bonhams auction, if you've been reading the horology press. So we're really looking forward to that for the main topic. My watch obsession this week has been not so much a watch, but I've been trying to restart the Casual Watch Reviewers website again. I've been working on it today, and I put a little note out on our Facebook group, Casual Watch Talk. If you're not a member, then please head on over there and apply for a membership. We'd love to have you. Been asking a few members if they'd like to write the odd article or two about their own collection, because my idea for the site is to have it where not only there's watch news, but also watch stories from real watch collectors, because I think certainly doing this podcast, Chris can attest to this, and doing my own YouTube channel, some of the most fascinating stories about watches are not the specs and the history of the watch necessarily, but what that particular watch means to the person that owns it. So that's kind of been my watch obsession. It's been kind of watch content obsession week. Okay, we've got a couple of news stories. I'll get everyone's opinion on these, and then, as I mentioned, for the main topic, we've got something of a Seiko special, which I know I'm certainly looking forward to. 3 main stories here, and I'll have to start off with one that's been quite active on the Facebook group, is the new Fortis F43. Now, normally a new watch from a company it makes some news depending on what it looks like, but companies are releasing watches all the time. But Fortis are very rigid in their design language, I would say, probably as rigid as maybe Rolex. They have a handful of lines. They try things here and there, but when you see a Fortis watch, there's no doubt that it's a Fortis watch. And that's what made this exciting, was this F43 as a kind of a departure. So what did you guys think of this watch?
I got the email teasing it, and then saw, or the Instagram tease, and then I actually looked up the F43, what the F43 used to look, well, the old one, the previous model looked like, because I believe it's a new edition. This one's kind of changing the format for sure. It's not sticking to complete the Fortis design language. I think that's probably because Fortis was in trouble a couple years ago, and then was purchased by basically an enthusiast who was really excited about the brand, bought it. And then he had talked about, I think one of his first sort of press releases was they were talking about going all COSC certified, like that was the most important thing for people. And, I think we talked about it on the pod. I think, okay, yeah, it's one in the checklist, but not necessarily. This looks, so as far as the new F43 bicompacts, it looks really sharp. I don't quite know what to think about some of the changes in design. They've moved the date down, and Fortis is known for that, the arrow on the date, so that like to go up on it and the date kind of thing. And so that's gone. I'm a little like, okay, but yeah, it's an interesting design with the 12-hour bezel on it. Chronograph looks like. I don't know what movement it's powering, but it's got some green and orange lume colors. It looks professional. Looks tool watch aesthetic. But I do not understand this is not a pilot watch marketing. Is that from them?
I think so.
Yeah. So they're like, this is not a pilot watch, and then it says Fortis Flieger. which means pilot watch in German. so I'm a little confused, but okay. All right, cool. I mean, it's got it has the telltale, for you Flieger folks, it's got the telltale triangle and dots at the top, which is actually the other way. Isn't the triangle supposed to point down? Anyway. So it's got some interesting design cues. I think they're taking a new direction. I think it's good. What do you guys think?
Well, look at you can't see it, but if I hold my Hamilton up, this is just pure, it's exactly the same dial layout.
Yeah, exactly. With the date at the 6. Mm-hmm.
Date, the same subdial measurements. We're running seconds on the left and then a 30-minute totalizer.
Yeah, I would expect it to be running a 750 probably. Because
you're right. With Fortis, it should be a modified 7750 of some sort. Even has the same two lines. So I say Pan Europe caliber H31 and they say F43 bicompacts. I mean, it's funny just how similar the layout is.
Don't know what the design cue for the orange between the 11 and the 1 is, other than it kind of makes the 12 pop, I guess. A little design there. I don't know kind of what the reasoning is in
10-minute. I don't know.
Yeah. And if there's, I mean, for me, like if you're going for the tool watch aesthetic, that's great. But don't put any colors or numbers or markers on there that don't make sense. So if you're gonna go for tool watch.
Next story I had was, since the pandemic's been going on and a lot of the watch stores have been shut down, there's some things that we predicted would happen with the watch industry. Obviously, sales of certain brands went down, but there's been some interesting things that have occurred with people being at home. One is that the vintage watch market is gone crazy, but also Watch Pro did an interesting article where they interviewed Mr. Wolf from Wolf Watchwinders, and he had to shut the business down because of COVID-19. But what he's saying now is that sales are better than ever. So I'm interested to know, A, from both of you, whether you use watchwinders or not, and B, why do you think watchwinders are suddenly a hot commodity in this COVID kind of world or post-COVID world?
Okay. I mean, I'll jump on that one. I have a old kind of style watch winder. I can't even remember who makes it. It only goes in one direction. So guess what? It doesn't wind my 7750s.
Right. So counterclockwise then. It goes counterclockwise then.
One direction. It took me a long time to try to figure that out. I'm like, why is this not working? But I'm not a big fan of them. There's been, if you go on any of the forums, there's almost a religious discussion, political discussion on watchwinders, yes or no, because do you leave them on there? Do you not? If you ever saw the Doctor Strange Marvel movie, of course, he pulls out the drawer and he's got everything on a watch winder, all these exotic watches he pulls out.
But the drawer is flat, so it won't. The drawer's flat, so it won't actually wind any of those watches. But
I'm trying to figure that one out too. Right? Wait, this doesn't work. Good point. But so I almost never use it as a result. I mean, it would work with my Seikos because they're have the magic lever, so they wind both directions. But it's not a good, to me as an engineer, it's not a good wear and tear thing unless you're going to just wear it all the time, or you're going to wear it like 3 or 4 days a week. You just want it to be fresh for you. That's one thing. But I would not keep it's like leaving your car in idle forever, in a way. To me, it just doesn't help the mechanism itself for longevity purposes. I don't know if anyone's done a study on this, but some of the watch rebuilders that I've worked with have looked at watch mechanisms, and they said, I could tell this one has been on a winder a lot, like living on a winder. He said, because he can pull out certain pieces of it on usually the winding bridge itself is trashed and is really moving around a lot. And so anyhow, that's my opinion. I went
super nerdy with it. So I have one that I actually built out of a stepper motor, and super nerdy sideline. This is in my Instagram, so I had picked up some of those completely silent steppers, and I was looking for a project to sort of start into stepper motors. And so I picked up a Trinamic silent step, driver. And I put it to the test because I was like, is it really silent? Because it those expensive watch winders, if they have any sort of gearing in them, I mean, on the nightstand, I'm like in my bedroom, it's like cave mode, so no light, shall enter, and no sounds other than maybe like a fan on, whatever. And if the thing makes any noise, it would drive me crazy. So I was like, all right, well, if it's going to live on the nightstand, it has to be completely silent. So that's the tangent. I have one, and I use it as a keeping the everyday watch going for the next stint, or spinning up something for a future. So I'm not the guy with the 15. I'm the guy with the 1. And I think about it like in my collection. So for example, so like if I knew I was going on vacation, or if I knew I was going to the lake for the weekend or whatever, right? So I might take the time on Wednesday night to set the dive watch, get it all set up, get it dialed in, put it on the winder, and then come the weekend, I can just grab it. That's how I use a winder. And I tend to agree. I feel like there's a little bit of the information out there, and you're absolutely right about it being religious. I think there are some people out there that are like, you will destroy your watch. But from a car perspective, not an engineering perspective, from a car perspective, let it run. I mean, I feel like if the machine's running, that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to run. I certainly agree with you. Like if you've got a Rolex that's, that you never wear because you don't want to scratch it, and it's just living on a watch winder for 6 years, that's bad. Like, don't do that. Just let it, just like, if you're not going to wear it, then just let it run down and leave it, and then there's the other folks that are like, oh, well, the oils will get sticky. And you're like, sure. If you're currently from the 1940s and, you're lubricating your watch with whale oil or whatever, but like we have modern lubricants. And so,
Right.
And so all the modern Bergeron lubricants are all synthetic. They're all
everything's synthetic now. Nobody
Yeah.
uses that stuff.
Exactly.
But I'm told that the modern lubricants, instead of getting icky and like almost like oil spilly, it becomes 80 weight grease or whatever. They outgas.
Oh, okay.
So the modern synthetics, I've been told, just watching some watchmakers talk about it, is that they'll outgas. So you have to be careful about that. So instead of something getting gluey and stop running, it'll outgas and you lose lubrication and you start wearing parts. I mean, there's a materials engineering piece of this, a lubricant engineering piece that has to probably be looked into, to your point.
There's a materials engineering thesis in this. So yeah. Yeah, good stuff.
Interesting. And then the last story I've got here, and I just only noticed this one, but Bolivar are releasing limited edition watches, but they're not based on a film or on a famous sporting event or on a car or anything like that. They're actually basing them on the famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright. I'm interested to get your thoughts on this. I mean, anyone who's not familiar with Frank Lloyd Wright, his houses are so iconic. I mean, there's the falling water house that has the waterfall incorporated in the house. He definitely had a design language on the East Coast, and then he migrated, I think, with a mistress maybe over to the West Coast, and then he had a renaissance over here, trying different building materials and things like that. First of all, I'm thinking, why aren't Swatch doing this? But second of all, what do you think about a limited edition watch is based on an architect that probably doesn't resonate with a younger audience, I would say, or modern?
Watchmakers and car manufacturers have been doing this now for years, and everything is retro inspired.
Yes.
And I like that too, because I'm kind of I was born in the 60s. So a lot of the things that I'm attracted to are popular, 60s, 70s, what have you. But, and then, Chrysler's completely redone that, right? In terms of coming up with models that are like some of their old muscle cars, and Chevy's done it with the Camaro, and you can go on and on. And so watches have done the same thing. In fact, again, like my Hamilton, it's a kind of a reprise of the 1971 Caliber 11 that it co-developed with Buren and Hewer and company. But maybe they're trying to do something different. Maybe they're trying to come up with a new angle instead of, I'd love them to bring the Accutron back to the Space View. That would be incredible.
That's what I thought these
They're
are.
not going to do
yeah,
that.
that's what I thought these are when I glimpsed at one, because one looks like it could
Very
be.
technical, yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's part of what they're trying to play with. But Boulevard, I don't know if they're searching for an identity. I have one of their Accutron 2s, one of their quartz, their high frequency quartz models,
Yep.
and it's insanely accurate. But I don't know what would present me to go and buy a Bulova right now.
I feel like it's very similar to any of the Bauhaus designs, and where they take that minimalist style. But I think there are some other watches that have sort of expanded on that. I think even Swatch has done one, where they're actually taking. So I mean, the difference here is, I feel like there's some illustration on the dials that are in the Frank Lloyd Wright style, and
right,
it's sort of bringing that forward. The case, one of the on the square or the rectangle case style is pretty cool looking. But and it matches. I think it matches the design. So I think they're pulling from that sort of design language. I think I'd say it's similar to being inspired by Bauhaus, which was very much an architectural style as well as a typography and design style. So more of the architecture side. Interesting.
They're very reasonably priced, though. So
I was surprised at that as well. Yeah, they're sort of less than $500, aren't they? Which the recent reissues that Bulova's done, certainly their retail price has been more than that. So
yeah, I'm looking on the Bulova site, and the one that Chris mentioned, the kind of tank style, Cartier tank style one with the design it's $200 on the Bulova site. So that's very reasonable.
Sam, I got another quick story for you here. So we talked a couple of weeks ago or last week about that Stova watch that I imported for my wife for a anniversary gift. She got it. She loves it. Great color. Speaking of Bauhaus design, based on that. And so yesterday I got a bill from FedEx, and I was a little frightened because I was like, "Uh-oh, what is this?" And it has Department of Homeland Security on it, and all this official documents. And then I see like the third page is from Stova, and it's detailing. But so I flipped through it, and I'm like, this is a bill, and I'm like gonna get. It was for $21. And they give you the breakdown, which I found interesting, and I wanted to talk to you guys about, which was, so just to let you know, for those of you stuck and in quarantine and making purchases from other countries, that Sam and I both agree that you probably shouldn't be doing, importing a watch from Germany. So you would think that the ETA Elaborate movement, Elaborate, she got me. I'm the watch guy, and I don't even know how to say that. High polished. It's got all the fancy stuff on the back. It's great looking movement. $1.53. So that's how much they charge. So watch movement, bringing a Swiss watch movement into the country, $1.53. The more expensive part was the stainless steel case itself for $7.64. Which I found I was like, wait, so they're charging me more to bring the stainless steel case than the movement that makes up most of the price of the watch, and then some other stuff, some other miscellaneous stuff for the shipping, the handling, and the strap. I think the strap was to import the strap $1.58. So
they broke down the sales invoice into the watch's component parts.
Yeah, so it has the harmonization codes for everything. So it has like the individual harmonization code for each individual part. And I think because FedEx is their broker here, it seems like they
I think this is an artifact back in the 70s when there were tariffs placed upon importing watches and such. And I think, if I'm remembering right, that there's a difference in terms of importing a watch movement as opposed to a watch case, which is why they are taxed at a different level. I think it goes back to some tariff back in the 70s or 60s.
It's just sort of carried over. I was terrified that I was going to get this crazy because not paying VAT saved a ton of money. But then, having importation, I was a little, worried like, oh, what's this going to cost importation wise? So seems completely reasonable.
Before we dive into our main story, which I'm really looking forward to, our sort of Seiko.
Hey, it's Chris from the Casual Watch Talk podcast. As our longtime listeners know, we often talk about cars here on the pod, and that's no coincidence. Like a lot of mechanical watch lovers, we're both into cars and racing. A couple years ago, I curated a collection of automotive-inspired straps and started the Campionato Club. Campionato Club watch straps celebrate the rich history of automotive liveries with their inspired colors. Available in a single pass NATO, two-piece, and our new super comfy elastic NATO. Check out Campionato Club on the web. That's championship in Italian, CAMPIONATO.club.
Special here. Let's pause for a very quick ad break. Hey everyone, welcome back to Casual Watch Talk. So for our main topic today, we've got somewhat of a Seiko special here, and there's been a lot of interest in vintage Seikos, certainly in the last couple of months, and vintage watches in general, I would say. But something very significant happened with the Seiko vintage watches. There was a recent auction where Bonhams put up for sale an auction that was very specifically Seiko. In fact, the watches that are for sale are Seiko's greatest hits, I would argue. And there was a bit of controversy because the auction was listed and then it got delisted and then it's relisted. It's still actively actually live now. So Todd, I'm really interested with your sort of passion for Seiko. First of all, is this unprecedented that there's a totally Seiko auction on a significant auction house like Bonhams? And also, I'd love you to give us a bit of background on why some of these watches were quite controversial when they did go for sale the first time.
As far as I know, I have not seen a Seiko-only auction before. Certainly, they have come up on auctions. I've bought a couple on different types of auctions, but they've never been highlighted in this way. There's never been this much publicity for just, a Seiko-only auction from evidently a collector in Asia who has around 200 pieces, according to the auction site. So the one that Bonhams has listed is the first part one, and there's going to be a part two, I guess, with whatever the next lot is.
Yeah, it's called the Bonhams Presents Making Waves is the name of the auction. You have to register on the Bonhams website to get the full list, but there's some spectacular examples there. There's an Olympic Games one from 1964. They've got the original 62 MAS. They've got a lot of the ones that Seiko's been recreating, right up to modern ones as well.
The 64 Olympic stopwatch is exceptionally rare. I believe there's only 100 known to have been made of that style. And so the dollar figures are on up there with, rare Rolex Daytonas, let's say, for example. I think they're predicting anywhere was at $13,000 to $26,000. Yeah, there it is. If you're a well-heeled Seiko collector, this is an opportunity to get some very rare watches. There's a 62 MAS. There's some of the rare divers. There's some of the rare chronographs on there, which I do know caused some of that consternation by the Seiko community when they were looking at them in detail, and they said, wait a minute, this has got a bunch of aftermarket parts in it, and you're not saying that it has a bunch of aftermarket parts in it. Of the vintage ones, there are some very good examples. There's also some questionable examples.
Seems like also a lot of new stuff on there too.
There's a lot of newer stuff with box and papers showing up. I
got to page 3 and I was like, oh, that's the JDM, the green turtle that they had on there.
Which is a nice watch if you want to grab one of those. They're hard to get, some of these JDM varieties.
Interesting.
Originally, when this was launched, there was obviously a lot of interest, particularly from, I would say, collectors like ourselves and people that listen to the podcast, friends of the Facebook group, people that probably watch my channel, because normally when we see a watch come to auction, we're talking the Paul Newman Rolex. Normally the stories are, wow, this Rolex achieved 17 million, or this rare Patek, etc. Everyone's just waiting for the day when Buzz Aldrin's Speedmaster is suddenly, pulled out of somebody's loft or whatever. But this, because it focuses on Seiko, and which is was sort of the everyman's watch, weren't they? It garnered a lot of interest, and I'm guessing that even Bonhams might have been surprised about how much the collecting community really knew about these references. Would you agree with that, Todd?
Yeah, I don't think that they were ready for just the collecting community response to this, as well as how fast it happened. Because I'm a frequent contributor on the Seiko Citizen Watch Forum, and somebody opened up a thread with this on it. And then, it was like Niagara Falls comes down of all the different folks chiming in. Oh, this looks great. I can't believe it. And then all of a sudden, wait a minute. This one, blah, 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 blah. This is not a right dial, blah, blah, blah. And they start going through it and they say, we can't believe that Bonhams is selling, basically Franken watches, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As this goes down this thread in rapid progression, it was very interesting.
Yeah. It feels like they, kind of kicked the hornet's nest a little bit. Like, who could possibly be that invested and interested in these Seiko, these Japanese watches? They aren't fancy luxury watches. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's the internet and there's a group for everyone. Oh God. we know everything about we know everything about this. So
yeah, you're right. The Flat Earth Society went and jumped in too. And they said, wait a minute,
wait a minute.
It's just the way things are. But one thing I've been doing is I found out that, most auctions, and the ones I buy from, for example, and I'll mention one of them, Invaluable, a lot of, 90-somewhat% of what's being auctioned is rather regular, not necessarily special stuff. But what gets headlined, it's kind of like, what does Ford want to advertise? Well, it wants to advertise the Ford GT, and it wants to advertise, the Mustang Mach 1 reissue, or Corvette wants to do this, or rather Chevy wants to do this with the Corvette. So what you see is a lot of the advertisement for the really high-end stuff, like they're really, Bonhams is really, and rightfully so, playing up the 1964 chronograph. But most stuff on these auctions, even these higher-end auctions, aren't necessarily super expensive.
So Todd, love to know if, well, two questions. Is there any that you've noticed that you think hidden gems in there? You don't have to say if you're going to bid on them or not. And then also, you mentioned about a lot of the ones that had aftermarket parts. Is there a specific model that was focused on? And did that because I believe they delisted the auction and then they relisted it. Did you find that those watches were removed, or have they been properly annotated? So I guess that's a two-part question. Was there one that looked like it really was a departure from its original? And is there any that you think on there that are sort of hidden gems?
Well, there's probably, they're not so hidden anymore with that wonderful bit of advertisement Bonhams got on this. I mean, is there, the old adage is there any such thing as bad news when you're trying to do something like this, even though I would argue that this was not good news. But yeah, there's some, one of them, I am registered on this auction, I'll say that. And there's one I'm looking at, which I'm not going to talk about. But, and so there are some good looking watches. Their estimates, not counting, the unicorns like the Summer Olympic watch, are reasonable. There's a group of us that keep track of Seiko prices, specifically the chronographs, how they're trading on eBay and that sort of thing.
For that, I'm looking at the Sushi Roll 5 Sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
Iconic watch.
Yes,
$520 to $1,000. If it's in as good a condition as it's in, I mean, this seems reasonable to me. It's not like it's not like this. We want $15,000 for the Seiko 5 from 1950. You're like, no.
Yeah, I see a lot worse prices asked for on eBay for these things, depending where they're coming from. But an example to go to that I'll pick on that I noticed pretty fast is it's lot 720. It's the bullhead. It's a black bullhead or blue bullhead. They're called both things on a strap, and that's fine. And it's got a reasonable price associated with it. And what you can do is you can click those. I was trying to figure out navigating Bonhams auction. You could click them and you can get, you can see who the specialist is, and then you can see some description about it. And then you can click view condition report. And then it took me a little bit to get that to work. You only get the condition report if you're registered with Bonhams, not necessarily with the auction, but if you have an account with them. And I do. So I was able to get the condition report. It's a couple pages long, and it kind of goes through kind of a little bit of the history. And then it goes the movement and chronograph and working condition to time of cataloging, which is important to know if they're running or not. Would recommend a service, which makes sense. And then it says, under the loop, the dial might have kept in a moist area for a period, and blue subdials with a faint yellowish discoloration. So, okay, they're going through some detail. This is good. And then it says the hour markers have signs of later restoration to a dark grayish color. Okay. Although the watch has the above mentioned condition issues, the dial is very original, and underneath the dial stamped 67, which means it was made in July of 1976. So this is actually fairly important because Seiko stamps all their dials, at least they used to. And it's stamped the same way they do the case back. So the first digit is the year and the second digit is the month that it was made. Usually for a complete, like, if you can show paperwork for it, if you've done a restoration, having a watch dial within a month or two of the back date is important, because that means that dial came most likely came with the watch. But the interesting part is that the case back on that is from it says 702446. So 7 is the year, so it's 77, and its O is for October. This dial is stamped like that, but it's not original to the watch.
And they didn't really spell that out, other than saying this is the dial, this is the date on the dial, this is the date on the watch back. And so only someone with your expertise would be able to say, like, yeah, so nobody dug into the watch dial pile from 2 years ago.
Yeah. But the other thing that I find fascinating is, how would they know that the dial stamps 67? You have to literally take the watch apart.
Yeah. Oh,
completely
that's a great
apart.
point. That's a great point.
Unless they've got a restoration receipt or pictures, which when I have my restorations done, I have pictures on the cloud. If I ever sell them, I have all this record. But I don't know how they know it's from July of 76.
I wouldn't even have thought of that.
That part bothers me. The second part is, I'm looking at the dial, and that's not an original Seiko dial. It still doesn't, something's not right with this to me, looking at it.
Do they show you, Todd, once you're signed up, do they show you more than the one? Because they have two pictures here for us in the public.
Right. The public.
They show you more pictures?
Nope, I got two. I got the case back, and I've got the front of the watch.
Okay, so
you can zoom in.
You can, but I don't really see what they're talking about with that yellow discoloration.
Let me go to that
super
too.
Light. I mean, I guess.
Let me click it again, because you're right. You can zoom. And
it's a decently high res picture, but yeah.
I don't see any. You can grab it with the little hand, and you can move it around.
Yeah.
Don't see the yellow discoloration.
Yeah, I mean,
I see
the hands
some marks.
The hands look, not rough.
The hands
but they
have been repainted.
Oh,
big
okay.
Time.
Oh, okay.
Big time repainted. They're not the right color, and you can, when you really zoom in, it looks like somebody took a brush.
Oh goodness.
I've seen somebody do this to a car, by the way, when I was going. Somebody actually used a brush and painted
roller.
a car.
Yeah,
We've all
done
it.
Yeah.
It's like,
you want paint? I got paint. I got some paint.
That's right. We can get this done this afternoon.
Right, exactly.
You want all the same color?
Yeah,
Okay.
Having rattle canned a lot of a car. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you and me both at our early racing days. But
yeah, don't do that. Don't do that to a vintage Seiko bullhead chronograph from the 1970s.
I'm looking at it, and the hands have been. But I think they say that the hands may have been repainted on this, and that's fine. The dial doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't look like it's the right color. I have a black one, a black bullhead that's been restored by one of the experts, and unfortunately, it's go back in for repair. Something happened, so I don't have it in front of me to do a comparison. That's how I usually do this. When you get, it's like, standards of measurement. I say, okay, I know this watch is right, so I'll compare to the one I have. Yeah, so I don't know. It's just not. The information they provided is weird, and the dial on this is weird. And when you see repainted hands, that's a sign. Number one, somebody's been in there, and number two, whatever else that they've done.
It's amazing as well. This auction there's this gentleman or lady, whoever the collector was. I mean, it appears as if they've cleaned out every Seiko they've ever owned, because we're even talking a lot of modern ones, which these are still readily available on Amazon. It seems odd that they would auction these ones off that are still available for purchase. I mean, there's what looks like almost a brand new Grand Seiko diver in the mix too, as well. So I don't know if somebody's been going through a divorce or something's untoward's happened, but this looks like a complete collection dump out, and you wonder why they've done that, because does it cloud maybe some of the more specialist pieces. But I had a question about, I don't know if you know this, Todd, but for the Olympic 64, it seems to have a fairly unique to Seiko date complication where it's almost two separate numbers. I've not seen anything like that on a vintage or it's something you would see on maybe IWC, or I think Glashütte do this, where the date is two separate wheels, it looks like almost.
So that's not a date.
Oh, right.
Yeah, you're right. It does look like a Lange, so that's a counter. That's like a lap counter.
Oh, okay.
That's what the other pusher does.
It does look like that date complication. I thought so too.
It's just like a Lange date.
Yeah, like the 3rd of August or something.
Yeah,
but then there's no separation, is there? That's what I was thinking. I was like, it's always got the 3rd of August, but it's not. There's no separation, so it does say 38 on it. So it's part of the chronograph, because it looks like it's got 4 pushers on it anyway.
Yeah, it does. And one of them activates that. I don't know the exact operation of this, but one of them activates that counter so you can keep track of the laps.
Oh, I see.
Right.
I see.
So that's like a lap. So it's
like a lap counter.
Wow.
I believe. I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
Interesting.
It's certainly a good looking piece, and it looks to have a very unique, almost like a Rolex-esque metal bracelet to it. One of those sort of elasticated ones. I forget the name of the brand that does it, but
Speidel.
Yes, yeah, that's the one.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And this was a milestone watch for Seiko. Yeah, you're right. The band does not look like what you would expect it to be, but yeah, this is a milestone watch. This is Seiko spent a lot of money and a lot of time getting all the watches set up for the Olympics that they had to have, all the different timers and different types of timers, different types of stopwatches. There's probably a couple different, like a dozen different varieties of stopwatches they use.
Yeah.
I have one from '72. I have a Seiko stopwatch, and it was, that style was being used for later on for another Olympic Games. But yeah,
for 1964, also there's no computers here. There's no electronic timing. I don't know, maybe the late '60s, early '70s. I'd say for the Olympics. I'd have to look.
Those hands look to be straight off a modern Grand Seiko as well. The sword hands, are they? Yeah,
there's a great grammar of design with this model. Early Grand Seiko was also the same type of grammar of design. If you pull up an early GS model, you'll see the same family resemblance. It's really, really excellent. That's one thing that Seiko has done well over the years, is maintaining their grammar of design.
Todd, is there any on there? I'm interested to know this as well, with it being such a specialist Seiko auction. Really, other than this Olympic one, is there ones that you really never see? Is there some really unique ones that either aren't well documented, or they might have become a bit of an urban myth? I know some of the early Rolex, like military ones, are a bit of a myth, aren't they? That if they ever existed or not.
Yeah, that's funny. So the Seiko community, it's weird. There's religious factions within the Seiko community, and it's funny how that happens. But and so over the years, Seiko has not done a great job of necessarily documenting what they've put together. And in fact, I have a book that was put out by a watch enthusiast / watchmaker in Japan, and whose name is Sadeo Rugo. And I'm going to really do a horrible job on the name, Ryugo. And he put together a book called The History of the Seiko Speed Timer. And you can't just go out and buy this. You have to actually order it from him. And it's a little pricey. It's neat, though, is it inserts a lot of pictures. You can see a lot of movement pictures. It talks about some of the rare varieties. It has a bit of some interviews with some of the original, like the 5 Sports Speed Timer. So this is a 6139 designer, Mr. Tashikiko Oki. And I'm going to, again, do a horrible job of pronouncing the name, but it goes through, some of the original monopusher Seiko built, one of the first chronographs, and goes in through some of the rare ones. But getting back to your question, the reason I preface this is that there's been varieties of, like the chronographs, for example, that Seiko enthusiasts said didn't exist. These are aftermarket editions. And one of them is, a lot of people are familiar with the gold dial Pogue, There's a blue dials out there, and everyone knows about those, but there's also silver dials. And the silver dials there was one camp that said the silver dials were fakes. Somebody put on these dials, or maybe Seiko did it for some reason if they went in for service. And so this was a running debate for a long time, until finally somebody came up with some evidence that yes, Seiko in the Asian region put out these silver dials, and now the silver dials are very sought after. They're very expensive. I have one, no text one, meaning it was a later silver dial. I have one that says resist on it, back when you could still say the water was resistant, and before post-proof.
Yeah, before proof, right? Yeah,
right, post-proof. And so the resistant one is very rare, and it's currently at one of my watchmakers in Europe that does some of my restorations for me. And he's going through that. I bought it from Venezuela during this COVID economy. And he's doing that. So eventually the community came around. One of the most recent things is the concept of the Aussie Pogue. So the Aussie Pogue it's basically a gold dial watch that has a black indicator ring on the inside of the chapter ring.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yes. And there's been debates going on since Adam and Eve left the garden since it went into space. That at least since it went into space, that's a mod. Somebody just put a black indicator ring. Well, it turns out, and we've had black and white from Singapore sellers. We've had black and white ads that show what appears to be this special Pogue version. And then just recently, somebody found a color catalog that shows a black ring from 1970. And sure enough, at another restorer I bought off auction, very reasonably priced. I've been doing a lot of interesting COVID bidding on eBay, getting a lot of really good ones. He has it, and I found a 1970 proof gold Pogue with a black inner ring, and we did the research on it, and sure enough, this is a proof Aussie Pogue, and I'm very excited. So when I get it back, I'm going to have a fairly rare watch. So anyhow, this constantly goes on. The Seiko community is so funny. It's like a big extended family that argues things all the time, but it's never boring. Let's put it that way.
It kind of points out two things. I mean, first I want to say, and they have a couple of these JDMs. I mean, that green turtle and these different
green turtle's nice,
right? These different like JDM only designs that were released. We're talking 2017, 2018. So I could definitely see, without documentation, you go back to a pre-internet era, or you lose some of the documentation. I mean, 20 years from now, you could have a bunch of people being like, they never made a green turtle. And you're like, well, they did, but they only offered it in the Asian markets or whatever. So that's kind of the first thing. And then the second thing that I think you're really highlighting, Todd, is if you're going to get into collecting, these pieces or any sort of piece. I mean, you mentioned a book, you mentioned the community. What other sort of things would you, so I'm super interested in these particular, what am I doing to get my information and so that I'm not walking into these auctions like, completely unknown. You have a community that you sort of rely on too, right?
There's a community that you can rely on. It doesn't matter what you collect. I'm also an Omega guy, and the Omega community is good about this too, because if you want to buy a vintage speed timer, you're spending a whole lot of money. So you better get it right. And there's a good vintage community to help you out in terms of determining, the origins and such values associated with, like, let's say getting a speed timer, Speedmaster. Seikos are speed timers.
That's right.
Omegas are Speedmasters.
Right. Yeah.
So, you're right. You need to really get kind of immerse yourself, is a better word to use, right, into whatever watch types, manufacturers that you're interested in, especially if it's more modern ones. The fakes out there, they call them the super fakes.
Yeah.
If you go to Watchbox, you can see them compare a fake Rolex to a real one, or they had a Seamaster, a fairly modern American Seamaster, and it's scary. You put them side by side, and you can barely tell which one is the fake. And so that's but it has more terror to me than doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we I feel like we, in the price points that we talk about for our watches, I think sometimes we feel like, oh, well, we're safe because no one's gonna make a copy of that. But I've seen Oris super fakes, and I've seen, we're talking, $2,000 watch that they're just making an absolute duplicate of.
It's a lot worse than that. The Seiko 5s, right? So you're talking $100 watches. They're faked all the time. They're coming out of India, primarily China, India, that part of Asia, and I see them all the time. The Seiko Alpinists, the green Alpinists, a lot of those showed up on eBay not long ago. They're all fakes. Seiko turtles, patty turtles, are faked. Crazy. And you think, why are you faking a $500, $300, $200, $100 watch? But there's money in it. I don't understand, but somehow there's money in doing it.
Well, yeah, I bought that fake paddy off Wish for $69. So they must be knocking them out at $20. And if they were knocking that watch out at $20, they did a good job of it, and with a Seiko movement in it as well. I mean, the dial was the dead giveaway that it wasn't right. But in terms of, even the bracelet fitted my actual turtle that I have, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Todd, while you've been doing your research, we had a conversation about this just before the podcast. You found out something pretty interesting about auction houses that actually took me and Chris by surprise a little bit.
Yeah. So in terms of doing my research as a result of this Bonhams, not debacle, but maybe it was the fact that when you think that you're going to these fairly prestigious auction houses and what they're selling is what you think it is. It seems that and this is across the board in many ways that auction houses don't necessarily do the due diligence that they should do to verify the authenticity of what they're selling necessarily. And so there's this really cool on terms of a write-up on a blog to watch. And this was done a little while ago, November 29th, 2014 by Ariel Adams. And he goes in through 10 things you should know about wristwatch auctions. And so I learned a ton about that. And one of the things is that, when you see these big auction houses, they're usually trying to show provenance in some way. Like what did they sell recently? Was it Albert Einstein's Omega? Went up. It was, rather regular watch, but it was one of those things. But it went for a couple $100,000 because Albert Einstein owned it, right? And of course, we all know about, the Daytona, that Paul Newman Daytona that went up for, $12 million or something like that. Is that they don't necessarily do due diligence in terms of the provenance. So the provenance is not guaranteed, generally speaking, according to this article. And, claims about ownership, I'm quoting from it, provenance is supported by various types of documentation, such as receipts, letters, pictures, and more. A close examination of the evidence about a timepiece's proclaimed ownership is really important. But this story says, the full story is, in the worst instances, the auction house is lying about it. I'm not by any means saying that this is what's going on here with Bonhams by any means, but I'm saying in general, what they're saying about these auction houses is that,
or omitting, that like, we don't have this documentation, but we're presenting it as if it's official,
Right. And in terms of the Bonhams auction, I had to download the condition report separately. So it says, and it talks about it, and you ought to read the disclaimers in these condition reports. It's like it's like every lawyer on all sides of the ocean decided to get together and come up and make sure that we can't possibly be sued if for some reason this item is not as it turns out that there's a problem. It says, you have to do your own due diligence. So I guess the moral of the story is that can't just assume that what you're seeing is correct. You have to do your own due diligence. And to your point, there's literary license. Sometimes they obfuscate important facts, and even this article even says they even lie to potential buyers. Again, I'm not saying this about Bonhams necessarily.
It's something to watch out for. Yeah,
it's something to watch out for. So I'm thinking, you see these auctions. I know somebody who's very well known who works at a very reputable auction house, and I don't believe that they would ever engage in this by any means, but. It's buyer beware out there. It's caveat emptor, no matter if you're buying off eBay, which we all know, again, it's the Wild West, or if you're relying on a auction that has a curator. Every single watch lot has a name associated. So-and-so looked at this, and this is their, whether they just looked at it and said, yeah, that's a Seiko, or whether they really spent some time, or whether they have the expertise to really understand the watch is unknown.
That was really interesting. Todd, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast this week.
Thank you very much for having me again. Enjoyed it very much, Chris and Sam.
If you're wanting to find out more, Todd's a very active member on our Casual Watch Talk Facebook group, so head on over there to continue the conversation. As always, we really appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time on Casual Watch Talk. Thanks, guys. Bye.